Do you think high blood sugar causes diabetes? Think again. Long before your blood glucose goes up, your body is drowning in insulin, and you may not even know it. I'm Dr. Steve Hewlett. I've been a doctor of pharmacy for 35 years, and I realized that pills were not fixing the real problem. The real problem is our food and our habits. I now help people lose weight, decrease or eliminate medications, and get their energy back by changing what's on their plate and in their environment, not by living in the gym. I want to talk to you about is this exact thing, why high insulin is really what you care about. If you want to know what causes type 2 diabetes, it goes in this step. There's 7 steps. First, you eat glucose. Second, your blood glucose goes up. Then your blood insulin goes up. Then you turn all of that glucose into triglycerides, which is a form of fat. And then you force your body to store that fat in your fat cells. Then your fat cells become insulin resistant. And once all your cells are insulin resistant, now you start seeing that you have type 2 diabetes and your blood glucose is going up. So I want to break down each one of these as we go so you understand. So the very first step, you eat glucose. Okay. I want you to make sure you understand that there are 3 macronutrients, 3 big forms of food that you eat. And they're called macronutrients because they're measured in grams. Okay. That's going to be protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Each of these things, when you eat them, your blood doesn't see what you're eating. Your blood only sees what your intestines break those 3 macronutrients down to. So when you eat protein, your intestines break that down to the basic building blocks, which is amino acids. When you eat fat, your intestines break those down to the basic building block of fatty acids. And when you eat carbohydrates, your body breaks those down to the basic building block of glucose. So now, one thing I want to make sure also that you understand, there is a difference between sugar and blood sugar. When they talk about your blood sugar, all they're talking about is your blood glucose. That's all. When you're talking about sugar like table sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. Now, high fructose corn syrup is basically the same thing, only it's 45% glucose and 55% fructose. Remember, table sugar is called sucrose, and that's 50-50 glucose and fructose. Blood sugar is just glucose. So we're mainly going to worry about glucose right now. I just mentioned fructose. Fructose is the same sugar that you see in a lot of fruits. Our body doesn't know what to do with fructose. So almost every bit of fructose that we eat gets turned straight into triglycerides and stored as fat. So think of it like bears. That's what bears do. They go around, they forage for berries so they can fatten up for hibernation. So it's the same thing. Fruits are fine, eat them. Same thing with vegetables. If you're going to have fruits and vegetables, eat them. Do not drink them. When you drink them, you tear up all the fiber. You just tear up everything. Never drink fruits and vegetables. The other thing I said, fructose is what's sweet. Glucose isn't sweet. Fructose is. That's why they put sugar and high fructose corn syrup in everything that man makes in a bottle, box, bag, and can, because it tastes sweet and it gets you addicted and you keep coming back. So the sweet taste gets you to want to eat it, and then the glucose actually gets your brain, your pleasure center addicted. But that's all I'm going to say about fructose. If you want to hear more about fructose, you can listen to episode 6. And that was what is fructose and why is it poison? Now we're just going to focus on the glucose. Glucose is your blood sugar. So carbohydrates, like I said, when you say carbohydrates, you could say carbohydrates or you could say glucose. They're the exact same thing. So if you look on the back of a package and it says there's 50 grams of carbohydrates, that means there's 50 grams of glucose also. Now, glucose, there are 2 grams of glucose in 1 teaspoon of sugar. So if there's 50 grams of carbs, that's basically saying you have 25 teaspoons of sugar in that product that you're eating. So carbohydrates, glucose, exact same thing, divided by 2, and that'll tell you about how much sugar is in it if you just look at the carbohydrates. So when you look at a package label, you don't have to look to see how much sugar is in this. Yeah, that's fine because that's going to give you your fructose portion, but you really want to look at how many carbohydrates is because that's your glucose portion. And again, both of those are fattening and toxic. Carbohydrates equals glucose. Carbohydrates, all plant-based foods, all fruits, all vegetables, they all contain carbohydrates. Some more than others. The ones below the ground have a lot more. The ones above the ground have less. And lab-made food that you get out of the grocery store in the box, bottle, bin can, they are loaded with it. You've got to stay away from all that toxic food. Stick with whole, real, God-made fruits, vegetables, and animal food. Now, one way to look at this is the God made carbohydrates. Like I said, that's fruits and vegetables, but they all have carbohydrates. Okay. Starch, if you look at starch, that's the energy for the plant. Those are the plants that grow below the ground, like potatoes, sweet potatoes, carrots. Those have a lot of starch in them, and starch are just long chains of glucose. So, if you want to have a lot of glucose, that's when you eat the plants that grow below the ground. But nobody wants to eat a lot of glucose because that's what leads us to type 2 diabetes, as I'll show you. So below the ground, that's starch, that's long chain of glucose, and flour. Flour is just powdered glucose. So taste flour and you'll see it's not sweet. But anything with flour, like baked goods, your bread, your pastas, your pizza crust, everything that's made with flour, that's just plain glucose. So that's why we're being inundated with the glucose. So that was step one. Step one is you eat glucose because people eat glucose all the time. Step two is when you eat glucose, your blood glucose goes up. There are only two ways that your blood glucose goes up. One of them is it takes it out of your glucose stores, and you do not have very many glucose stores in your body. You have about 400 calories in your liver and about 2,000 calories in your muscle. That is not very much glucose at all. And so it's very important that you realize the only time we were supposed to use glucose for our energy source is when we were in a fight or flight situation, when we are under stress. When we get under stress, our body releases the cortisol, which is our stress hormone, that through a chain of events puts glucose into your blood. And that makes it where you have quick energy. But what was supposed to happen is you have that quick energy, you take care of the stressor, your glucose goes come down, and then your insulin comes down. And then you go about your day and you're supposed to be eating the fat out of your fat cells for your normal energy. And that's not what people do anymore. Our fat is supposed to, that is our main energy source. That's how God made us. That's why 1 pound of fat has 4,000 calories in it. And if you take all your glucose stores, you only have 2,400. That's just another sign that fat is supposed to be an energy source. Plus, every single cell in our body works wonderfully with fat as the energy source. In fact, if you take all the blood out of your body and you take all the glucose out of that blood, it only comes to about 2 teaspoons full of glucose. So all the other sugar that you eat and all these pastas and baked goods and dad-made foods and breads and all that, almost every single bit of that is getting turned straight into fat, into triglycerides. Everybody focuses on how do you get the blood glucose down? How do you get the blood glucose down? All you should care about is why is the blood glucose going up? And the reason the blood glucose is going up is because you are eating it. When you stop eating glucose, your glucose stays down, your insulin levels stay down. And if you're not eating all this lab-made food, your inflammation goes down. So all you have to do is stop eating it. It is truly that simple. But people are so addicted to their carbohydrates anymore, it's very hard to get them to understand this thought shift of what they're doing. So now step three. The step three was when your high blood glucose leads to a high blood insulin. And that's what happens. Your body does not want a high blood glucose. So as soon as it even senses glucose, in fact, with a lot of people, as soon as you just look at something with glucose, you look at coffee, you look at your Starbucks coffee, you look at donuts, you look at pizza, you look at anything, breads. Anytime you look at that, your body automatically starts getting ready for glucose. It automatically starts producing insulin. So once you eat that glucose in whatever form you put in your mouth doesn't really matter because all your blood sees is the glucose that your intestines breaks it down to. But once you do that and your blood glucose goes up, your body secretes insulin. There's only 3 things that your body does with insulin to get rid of glucose. And it is not that insulin secreted and all of a sudden it just makes glucose disappear. That's not what happens. What happens first, it's going to take that glucose that you just ate. And if you're doing any kind of activity right after you ate, it'll use a little bit of that to take care of the energy needs for whatever activity. but very small amounts. Like I said, if you work out heavy resistance training with weights for a full hour, you're only going to use up like 400 to 800 calories. So whatever little bitty exercise you're doing after you eat, if you walk, which most people don't, they just sit afterwards, all the glucose that you're eating is getting turned straight into triglycerides. So your insulin levels, first it comes up, it takes care of the immediate needs, energy needs right after you eat. Then the other thing insulin does is it tells your body to store all the glucose back in your storage sites, your glucose storage sites that may have been depleted a little bit, to fill those back up again. And again, that's not very much, about 400 calories in your liver and about 2,000 in all your muscles. So once all your stores are filled back up, and most people, their stores are never empty. They don't even go down because they eat glucose constantly. So their stores are always full. But after that, all the rest of the glucose that you eat, it goes to the liver, and the liver tells the insulin tells your liver, turn all this glucose into fat, into triglycerides, so it can store it for energy that you're going to use later. And that's the problem, is people eat glucose all through the day, every single day of their lives, now starting off as infants with all their infant formula that they put all this crud in also. So people are eating glucose constantly, so their glucose is always high, so their insulin is always high, and you'll see what the problem is with that. So the liver, the insulin tells the liver, turn all these glucose into triglycerides. A triglyceride is just, picture a big capital E. So a triglyceride, the three horizontal portions, those are free fatty acids. And then what connects them, that horizontal or that vertical part, that is glycerol. So since there's three fatty acids, which are also called lipids, okay, since there's three fatty acids and glycerol, that's why it's called a triglyceride. The reason I tell you that is because what happens when these triglycerides get to the liver. So first, this goes into step 4. Step 4 is your blood insulin gets turned into triglycerides. And let me go through those steps again, just so you realize what's going to happen. Remember, first you eat glucose, then that increases your blood glucose level, then that increases your blood insulin level, then the blood insulin tells your liver to turn it into triglycerides, and then the triglycerides go into fat storage, then that goes to insulin resistance, and that goes to type 2 diabetes. So far, I've talked about you eat the blood glucose, your blood glucose up, your blood insulin goes up, and now your blood insulin is telling your body to turn that into triglycerides. So now you have this liver that's packed full of triglycerides because of all of this glucose that you've eaten, and it has to get it out of the liver. Your liver makes 80% of all the cholesterol that your body uses or that your body needs. 80%. Every single cell in your body makes cholesterol. The reason I say that is because now you've got a liver that's full of cholesterol, which is extremely important, vital to life. And it also has all these triglycerides, which also are important. And it has to transport it around the blood. Glucose, cholesterol, and triglycerides are fats. Fats and water don't mix, and your blood is mainly water. So your liver has to wrap a protein around this cholesterol and this triglycerides. So you have a protein shell, and then you have cholesterol, then lipid and triglycerides down the hole like a little ship. I call these fat mobiles. This is your VLDL. When you go to get your cholesterol checked, they say VLDLs and LDLs are cholesterol. That is not true. They are lipoproteins. It's a whole particle of cholesterol, triglycerides, and a protein. So your liver makes these VLDLs. That's a very low density lipoprotein. That means that there's a lipoprotein, it's very low density because it's stuffed full of fat. So it's got cholesterol, it's got all these triglycerides. Then what your liver does is it sends this VLDL, this great big fat mobile, traveling all around your body, giving all the cholesterol and all the fat to all the places that your body needs fat and cholesterol. And that is a lot of places. So this VLDL, this very low density lipoprotein, it's floating around your body. It's giving away cholesterol, giving away these triglycerides to all the places that need it. As it does, it shrinks down. It shrinks down to an intermediate density lipoprotein. That's an IDL. Then it keeps on giving more cholesterol and more triglycerides away, and it shrinks down even more to a low density lipoprotein. Now, once it does that, after it's given away a lot of the cholesterol and triglycerides, and it becomes an LDL, that goes straight back to the liver, attaches to the side of the liver, goes in, and then your liver puts more cholesterol and more triglycerides back into this fat mobile. It swells it back up to a VLDL again and sends it back out into the bloodstream on its intended rounds. Okay, so that's it. It goes from VLDL, IDL, LDL back to the liver to become a VLDL again. Now, just before I go on to the next part, I just want to let you know, if you would like help with weight loss or understanding your medications or understanding your blood lab results, this is what we teach you inside of our digital Thrive Naturally Transformation, our TNT courses, or our one-on-one coaching. We focus on low carb, whole foods, and simple lifestyle changes to help you lose weight, often lower your need for medications, and build habits you can keep for life. So if you're interested in taking one of our digital courses or actually talking to me one-on-one, just click the link below if you want to work with us. So right now we have all these triglycerides. They're in this big VLDL fat mobile going to IDL and LDL, and they're circulating around. After they've given all the fat and cholesterol to all the places that the body needs, the very last place it goes is to your fat cells, and it's going to store all the fat in your fat cell for a time of later when you need that fat. And that's usually when you use the fat is times that you're not eating. When you're not eating glucose, your body naturally uses your fat for your energy source because that's the way God made us. That's the way we've been made for forever until our man-made food came out, which automatically everybody started switching over using glucose for their energy source. That's why we have all the diseases that we have right now. So the key is when these fat mobiles, these LDLs, they go to the fat cell. In order to get these big triglycerides, remember I said a triglyceride was like a big capital E with the 3 fatty acids and the glycerol backbone. That big capital E is too big to go across the fat cell. And this is key. This is very important. What I'm getting ready to explain to you is why I always say with high insulin levels, you force your body to store fat. With low insulin levels, you force your body to eat your own fat for your fats, for your energy source. And this is what I'm getting ready to explain to you. Because there is an enzyme, because that big triglyceride is too big, you have to cleave each of those 3 fatty acids off of that glycerol backbone. That way, the 3 free fatty acids can go across the cell membrane, then get inside, and then be turned back into triglycerides and stored. The key, there's an enzyme on the outside of every cell, fat cell, and there's an enzyme on the inside of every fat cell. And both of these enzymes do the exact same thing. They cleave those free fatty acids off that triglyceride so the free fatty acids can migrate across that cell membrane, going either into the cell or out of the cell. Now, what determines whether those triglycerides are going into the cell or out of the cell is insulin. When your insulin levels are high, that stimulates the enzyme on the outside of those fat cells called LPL, lipoprotein lipase. It stimulates that enzyme to start cleaving all the fats off the triglycerides so they go inside the cell and they get stuffed, okay, turn back into fats. However, and that when high insulin also, it inhibits the enzyme that's on the inside of the cell. That's HSL, the hormone sensitive lipase. So you stimulate the one that causes you to store fat and you inhibit the one that causes you to burn fat. When your insulin levels come back low, it does the exact opposite. It stimulates the enzyme on the inside of the fat cell, the HSL, to cleave those free fatty acids off that triglyceride so your free fatty acids can go across, and it inhibits the LPL on the outside of the fat cell. So all you can do is burn fat. You cannot store it. And that's why I've been saying high insulin levels, you force your body to store fat. Low insulin levels, you force your body to eat fat. So the key to all of the health problems is keep your insulin levels low so you can eat your own fat out of your fat cell. You're going to be losing fat. You're going to be becoming less obese, and you're still going to be able to preserve your muscle as long as you're eating plenty of fat and protein. So that's what this is. And that's about all I'm going to go into it. I actually did an entire podcast, episode number 34, called What Determines Whether You Store Fat or Burn It for Energy. So if you're more interested in this, go to episode 34 and you can hear more about it. So now we're into stage 6. This is the 6th part. The 6th part, so now we have the triglycerides. We have them all stored in our fat cells. So now what happens is as these LDLs, they go around your fat cells, and every time they come around a fat cell, they say, hey, here, I've got some triglycerides for you. I've got some fatty acids for you. So the fat cells, that, yeah, go ahead and bring that on. So the fat cell keeps getting more and more full. It gets bigger and bigger until all of a sudden that fat cell cannot take any more triglycerides at all. It can't handle it. Once your fat cell is totally stuffed, that cell, that one cell, is called insulin resistant. Now, there's nothing wrong with your insulin. You're producing plenty. There's nothing wrong with the molecule of insulin. There's nothing wrong with the cell. The fact is that fat cell is just too full and it can't take any more on. So what happens is it goes to the next fat cell and the next fat cell and the next fat cell. And as you start filling up your fat cells all over your body, and this takes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years to do this because you have fat cells all over your body. But when you start eating all this glucose constantly every day of your life, all throughout the day, which is what people do, and now we're starting them off with this horrible infant formula that's made out of the same stuff. So now we even have our babies that are eating glucose constantly. So now we have all this glucose going around. It's all being stored as fat. And now our cell is resistant. As it goes around and starts filling up all your fat cells, each cell, your body's becoming more and more insulin resistant as each fat cell fills up. And as these fat cells up, your body has to start secreting more and more insulin to be able to get what glucose is in there and what fat cells are left to be able to stuff that in there. So what happens is at first, when you're healthy, if you take your fasting glucose and your fasting insulin, both of those will be very low. As you start becoming insulin resistant, as each of these cells are starting to fill up with fat, it takes more and more insulin. So if you go to the doctor and you get your fasting glucose and your fasting insulin, your insulin levels are going to be higher and higher as you go. And that is what prediabetes is. Prediabetes is when your insulin levels are high and your glucose levels are low or normal. That is prediabetes. Prediabetes happens for 10, 20, 30, 40 years before you ever see a high blood glucose. Prediabetes is not having an A1C of 5.7 to 6.4. That was a marketing technique to try to get more people on diabetic medications because diabetic medications makes diabetes worse. That's why your doctor says that type 2 diabetes is progressive, it's chronic, and you're going to be put on more and more medications. It just keeps getting worse. It's irreversible. That's only true if you're taking diabetic medications. If you want to stop reverse diabetes, all you have to do is keep your blood glucose low. And remember, that doesn't mean bring your blood glucose down. That means stop eating it. That's all you have to do. Stop eating glucose and your glucose levels will drop naturally because your body doesn't want high glucose levels. So that's going to bring your insulin levels and all the rest of this gets totally reversed. Prediabetes is not an A1C of 5.7 to 6.4. And that's why I was saying high insulin and normal glucose. That's why I titled this High Insulin and Normal Sugar, the Silent Danger. And that's why. And your doctors don't do insulin levels because they don't understand, because the drug companies never told them to, because the drug companies want to sell you more type 2 diabetic medications. That's why. If you do get your fasting insulin level, and you can do this on your own, you don't even have to have a doctor. You can go on ownmylabs.com, pick out any lab you want, pick out your fasting insulin. They'll print off a sheet. You take that to someone who draw your blood, like LabCorp or Quest. Those are different places that'll draw your labs. Give that to them. My wife did that, cost $15. She had her insulin results back within the week. The other thing, be careful when you do this, if you're going to do it, because the range that they say on a lot of this, even your doctors, they're going to say that the range for a good insulin is going to be somewhere around 20. That's for all these glucose addicts, which we all are. Everybody's been eating carbs their entire life. That's for them. A true good fasting insulin that you want to shoot for is less than 5. And really you'd like that more closer around 3. Okay. That's the good insulin level. If you keep your insulin levels down, you're going to be able to take care of all these issues and totally reverse your type 2 diabetes and be off. And you'll be off all your medications very quickly, because if you're not eating glucose, your glucose isn't going up. And if it's not going up, you don't need type 2 diabetic medications. And all type 2 diabetic medications work by focusing only on the glucose. And the way it brings your glucose down is it stimulates your pancreas to produce more insulin, or it makes your cells more insulin sensitive. That's why I say type 2 diabetic medications makes diabetes worse, because diabetes is a problem of too high insulin, not too high blood glucose. Too high blood glucose is just a symptom of type 2 diabetes. So that leads us to the final step. Once your cells start filling all your fat cells up with all these triglycerides you can't handle anymore. Now all of a sudden your body starts storing all this fat all around your organs. That's why you get a fatty liver disease. That's why you get pancreatitis. That's why you get fat around your heart. That's why the number one reason people go on dialysis is because of all the fat and insulin that tears up their kidneys. Your brain, Alzheimer's, is called type 3 diabetes because the three pillars of disease, when you have these three pillars, you are killing every organ in your body. When you have high insulin levels, you have inflammation throughout your body, and you have high blood glucose levels. Because remember, type 2 diabetes isn't just condition like high blood pressure. Okay. Type 2 diabetes is an umbrella of diseases. Once you have type 2 diabetes, you are damaging every single organ in your body because your body does not like high blood glucose because glucose attaches to proteins and totally tears up all the proteins in your body. It doesn't like high insulin levels because insulin tears up your blood vessels. It tears up all these other organs, and inflammation obviously is horrible for your body. Okay. So that's why those three pillars, and that is exactly what type 2 diabetes is. So you're killing every organ in your body. And that's what I want you to be very aware of. And as you remember, this all started with eating glucose. So now if you look, and I said that what happens is you eat glucose, then your blood glucose goes up, then your blood insulin goes up, then your insulin tells your liver to turn all that glucose into triglycerides. Then your triglycerides go to your fat cells and stores that in your fat cells until your fat cell becomes insulin resistant. And then when all your fat cells become insulin resistant, now you have full-blown insulin resistance, which is type 2 diabetes. So if you go back to the beginning, all you have to do is stop eating glucose. Because when you don't eat glucose, your glucose doesn't go up. Your body does not produce insulin. It doesn't turn the glucose into triglycerides. So you're not storing anything in your fat cells. So your fat cells don't get resistance. And remember, the way you're eating glucose is you're eating lab-made food that is nothing but glucose, fructose, chemicals, and seed oils, extremely toxic, or you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, which are plant-based foods, which is your fruits and your vegetables. So remember, if you have trouble with obesity, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, even if it's just what they're calling pre-diabetes, which you're way late in the game if you go by an A1C of 5.7 to 6.4, not totally reversible. You can still reverse it, but that's marketing. Stay away from lab-made food. Eat your fruits and vegetables seasonally. If they're not actually growing out of the ground during that month, you should not be eating them. So you should not be eating strawberries in the middle of December. If you are, that means those are genetically modified. They have been chemically altered, and the chemicals is what's causing all the inflammation in our body. So eat real fruits, real vegetables, by far, preferably from a local farmer. That way you can talk to the farmer and find out they don't spray all the chemicals that the grocery stores do, because they have chemicals all over the produce that they use. So stay away from that. If you really have a lot of trouble with glucose, remember, stay away from the ones that grow below the ground, like potatoes. Those are going to have a lot more glucose than the ones that grow above the ground, like lettuce. Okay. And that's what you need to do. And stay away from fructose, which means you're staying away from all lab-made food. And really, the fruits that you eat that have fructose, eat them very sparingly. Again, only when they're seasonal. And still, even then, think of the bear. Think of the bear that's eating them to get fat to hibernate. And as far as the glucose, think of the grains, all the grain, the flour. Grains is how you fatten cattle up for butcher. So even if you have a grass-fed cattle, if you go and you feed them a bunch of grains right before they're butchered, that fattens them up because grains are from a plant and grains have nothing but glucose in them. So that's why. So glucose will fatten you up and fructose will fatten you up. And you can stay away from all that if you just ate animal-based products. You're going to stay away from most of it when you do that. So eat mainly animal-based products, fruits and vegetables sparingly, and be careful which ones you eat if you have any glucose troubles. And that's all I have for you today. I just want to thank you so much for coming today, for listening to me. And until next time, stay nourished and stay well.